make you laugh, but not going to make you touch your heart or anything else. My friend Ferndale asked me if I wanted to go to Beckley to get a hamburger. It was like a half hour, maybe an hour drive, which is a long way to go for a hamburger. But I was 17 and Fern was pretty. So I said, yeah. And we drove to Beckley. She had a pair of walkie-talkies in the back seat of her car. And I asked her what they were for, and she said, don't worry, I have a plan. Now, Ferndale and Skeeter are a lot alike in that they often have plans. And generally those plans are nefarious. But the difference between Skeeter's plans and Fern's plans is that Fern's plans generally have a well thought out exit scheme. So we drove to Beckley and we pulled into the parking lot at a McDonald's, and Skeeter's truck was already in the parking lot, and Fern pulled her car next to Skeeter's truck so that Fern, the driver, was on the passenger side of Skeeter's truck, and Charlotte, Skeeter's girlfriend, was sitting in the passenger side of Skeeter's truck. And Fern took one of the walkie-talkies and she handed it to Charlotte and she said, take this. Now, here's the thing. Fern was an electronics genius. Fern was all kinds of genius. And we had a teacher at our school. We had like a complete recording sound studio at our school. This guy had been a roadie for the Grateful Dead, and he got tired of doing that, so he'd moved back to Barber County, West Virginia, and he donated a whole bunch of money to the school to set up a recording studio, and that gave him the credentials to be a teacher. And so he taught us all kinds of electronic stuff, and he was a wonderful teacher. He was that wonderful, wonderful kind of teacher who never taught you anything that you didn't want to know. It's a skill. And so Fern was fascinated. She learned everything there was to know in that recording studio about electronics. But one thing she figured out, she said, I figured out how to take these walkie-talkies. When you press the button, so that you can talk through them, so that you can broadcast, then you have to let go of it to have the sound come back through. She said, I figured out how you can press the button, and when you press the button, you can broadcast and receive at the same time, so that you can just keep the button down. And I was looking at it, and she goes, it's like a phone. And I was holding this walkie, and I was like, wouldn't that be crazy? If you could just carry a phone wherever you went. Just put it in your pocket. And so she said to Charlotte, what I want you to do is go over, time it so we get there at the same time, but you go over to the takeout microphone at Burger King, and we're going to go to the takeout microphone at Wendy's. And so Skeeter and Charlotte drove to Burger King, and we drove to Wendy's, and Skeeter held the microphone, or the walkie-talkie against the microphone, and Fern held the walkie-talkie against the microphone at Wendy's, and the guy at Burger King said through the microphone, would you like a Whopper? And that went through the whole system to the woman who was working at Wendy's. She said, well, we don't have Whoppers, we have a Dave's Double. And the guy at Burger King said, Dave's not here. And I don't think he's working a double. And the lady at Wendy's said, so one Dave's Double. And the guy at Burger King said, I said Dave's not here. And the lady at Wendy's said, so you want a root beer, and you don't have to scream. And the guy at Burger King said, okay, so one ice cream. And she said, we don't have ice cream, we have Frosties. And the guy at Burger King said, if you want a Frosty, you got to go to Wendy's. And the lady at Wendy's said, this is Wendy's. And the guy at Burger King said, well, Wendy, I'll tell Dave you stop by. And then we went and got a hamburger at McDonald's. And we went home because it was a school night. Now, our school started like everybody else's school. We went in, we went to homeroom, and then we'd have announcements. And the announcements were always done by our principal, Dr. Hoonfuss. That's not his real name. I made that up. It's my made-up German for dog foot, because that describes the man perfectly. And he would always start. The guy could have been, he really missed his calling. He could have been like the dictator of a small South American country, or at the very least, the evil warden of a corrupt prison. But he messed that up by going into public school administration. But he would get on, every morning he would get on, and he would always start the announcements the same way. This is Dr. Hoonfuss, principal of Half Dollar High School. case we'd forgotten who he was the last time. And then he would just read through the announcements. But he had this amazing thing about himself. If he heard himself say something, he believed it was true. He could not be later convinced that it wasn't true if he had heard it come out of his mouth and go back to his ears. So he read the announcements, and you could tell that he was reading them. He never pre-read them because he stumbled over the words and he got things wrong. And one time he got on there and he said, "This is Dr. Hoonfoos, principal of Half Dollar High School. There's been a terrible accident on the east side of the school. Nobody look out the windows." And the whole building just tilted in that direction. So we were sitting at lunch, and Skeeter said to Fern, he said, "You know what, I don't think Dr. Hoonfoos ever pre-reads the announcements." And Fern worked in the office as like her work study. She says, "No, he doesn't." Why? And Skeeter said, "Because I bet you could just type up anything and put it in that basket and he would read it." Fern said, "Don't make it dirty." So the next day we were in homeroom. This is Dr. Hoonfoos, principal of Half Dollar High School. And he did the regular announcements. And then he said, "This is a special announcement. Today, after school at 4 o'clock at the Half Dollar City Pool, there will be water polo tryouts. Life jackets will be provided, but you are required to bring your own horse." And it was a big hit. Everybody thought that was really funny. And Dr. Hoonfoos had heard himself say it, so he believed that it was happening. And the only other teacher, none of the teachers respected him, because, you know, when you're a despot and a dictator, your own troops don't respect you. All the other teachers hated him, so they weren't going to tell him that it wasn't true, except Miss Doberman, also not her real name. But she had like this weird power crush thing going on with Dr. Hoonfoos. She's the only person in the whole world that liked it. And she thought maybe this wasn't true. So she said, "You know, I don't think this is true." And Fern heard her say that to Dr. Hoonfoos. And she came to Skeeter and said, "I think that Dr. Hoonfoos might be on to us about the water polo tryouts." And she said, "What are we going to do?" Skeeter said, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." So the three of us, me, Fern, and Skeeter, walked down to the office. Now, the office door was like here. The interior office door was here. And then there was that window that you have in school, this like this big, and then it's got chicken wire inside of it so that you can, you know, because schools are zoos, and the adults in the office just wanted to watch the animals outside. And then over here, there was a payphone. And so Skeeter went to that payphone without being able to be seen through the window. And Fern and I went and stood by the door over here so we could hear both sides of the conversation. Skeeter called the school, and the secretary answered, and Skeeter said, "Jane, this is Tommy, down at the pool. Dr. Hoonfoos called me. Can I speak to him?" So she handed the phone to Dr. Hoonfoos, and he said, "Hello." And Skeeter said, "Yeah, this is Tommy. Dr. Hoonfoos, you called me." And Dr. Hoonfoos said, "I called you?" And Tommy said, "You just said you did." And Dr. Hoonfoos said, "Then I must have. Did I leave a message?" And Skeeter / Tommy said, "Yeah, you said you called about, do you want to know about the water polo tryouts?" And he said, "Well, then I must have wanted to know about the water polo tryouts." And Skeeter / Tommy said, "Yeah, well, I don't think we can have those tryouts today. There's something wrong with the hydrator down here at the pool. They can't get the water wet enough to make it buoyant enough for the horses to float." And Dr. Hoonfoos said, "Well, that's a shame. The kids will be so disappointed." And by this time, Skeeter was starting to laugh a little bit, because that's a little funny. And so Fern was, you know, she was like, "Get off the phone, I'll take care of this." So Skeeter said, "Oh no, I gotta go." And Dr. Hoonfoos said, "What's wrong?" And Skeeter said, "There's an emergency, the pool's on fire." And Dr. Hoonfoos said, how did the pool be on fire? It's water." And Skeeter said, "I told you, there's something wrong with the hydrator." And he hung up. And Fern went into the office. Now, Fern was one of those people, I'm sure you've met her. You might be her. She is one of those people that is so self-confident and so good that no one ever suspects that they're up to anything, and therefore they can get away with everything. And I just saw two father-like people in the audience poke their daughter-like people in the shoulder. So you know those people exist. And Jane was the same way, so she just let Fern do what she wanted to do. So Fern walked behind the desk, put a piece of paper in the typewriter, fed it through, typed a quick note, handed it to Dr. Hoonfoos, and said, "Dr. Hoonfoos, Tommy at the pool just called. He wants you to read this announcement." And he was still holding the phone. And he said, Tommy just called you? She said, well, you just said he did. So he believed it. And he took the announcement without reading it. He went and he picked up the microphone. And he said, this is Dr. Hummelfuss, principal of Bethel High School. I'm afraid I have to tell you, please don't be too disappointed. The water polo tryouts have been canceled. They're having a problem with the hydrator at the pool. If you brought your horse to school, you can leave it in your locker overnight. So this went on for a while. The problem was other kids started to try and slip notes in there, and Fern had to spend an awful lot of time making sure nobody else left notes. And then teachers were really into it. Like, we tried to time the announcement so we'd be with certain teachers, because especially the drama teacher would be like, man, I wonder who writes this stuff. And then other teachers would say, I wish you'd make an announcement about, and you know, if it was good, we'd put it in there. So this went on for a while. And then he got on. I thought we were done. I thought we quit. But he got on one day and he said, this is Dr. Hummelfuss, principal of Bethel High School. He said, I have a special announcement. This was on a Wednesday. He said, on Friday, we're going to have a special assembly in the gym. We have gotten a grant from the Librarian of Congress and Dr. Dewey Decimal himself will be coming to the auditorium to do a presentation. All students, teachers, and staff are required. Well, that reminded me that I needed to go down to the library at the school there, because my English teacher, Mrs. Long, she is not, I don't see her in the audience, sometimes she's in the audience. She gave us extra credit if we would do book reports on books that we weren't assigned to read otherwise. And then you had to write like a one-page, you had to write the title of the book, the author of the book, and then you had to write the Dewey Decimal symbol, and then you had to do a summary of the book, and then a review of the book. And if you turn those in, you got a little bit extra credit. Now, nowhere in those instructions did it say that you had to read the book. So I would just make up books on the way to school on Friday morning, write my letter. But the trick was, I couldn't be by any famous author. She was a good English teacher. She would have known most books by most famous authors. So I had to make them by obscure authors, and then so boring that no one would ever want to read them. The reason we had to put the title and, of course, the Dewey Decimal number was that so she could go find the book in the library if she wanted to read it. So mine would be like the Sunset Swing Set by Archibald Wainfield. It'd be like, Tommy Milgrove fell in love with Susanna Feldman, and then World War II came, and he went to be in the Navy, and she stayed home. And the book follows their lives through a series of letters while the war was going on. And then the review would be like, this book isn't very interesting. If you're interested in a love story, it's too much about him being in the war. If you're interested in the war, it's too much of a love story. I do not recommend this book. She came to me one day and she said, you know, you have the worst taste in books. She said, I could give you some recommendations of some good books. And I said, no. I said, listen, this is how it is, Miss Long. I said, I go, children, young people, I don't have time to explain this. I don't even have time to finish the story, but I'm going. In the old days, when you went to the library, you opened up the book, and on the back cover, on the inside, there was like half an envelope. And in that envelope, there was a card, like a 3x5 index card, and it had a graph on it. And when you checked out a book, you wrote your name on a little line. And then the librarian punched with a little, stamp what date the book was due. And this was like an informal review system, because if you read a book and you went and looked at the card of who else had checked it out, you might find out that, someone in town you respected had checked that book out. So then you'd go and find other books that they checked out. It was kind of a way to keep track of that. But anyway, where was I even going with that? Oh, wait, I'll get back to it. This is what I told her. I said I went to the library. When I go to the library to find books, I look at the card in the back, and I find books that haven't been checked out for a long time, or that have never been checked out, and must feel like they're serving solitary confinement sentences. And she was an English teacher. That made her cry. which I sort of felt bad about, but not really. So she said that she went to look for one of the books that I had checked, that I had done a report on, but she couldn't find it in the library, and the librarian said there was no record of it being checked out, and she went and she looked in the card catalog, which I just don't have time to explain, and she couldn't find a card for the book either. And I said, well, did you look up the subject card, the title card, or the author card? And she said, I looked up the author card, and I was like, oh, the author card must be lost. See you later. And she went to where she was going, and I ran to the library, and I got 2 index cards, because our card catalog was old, so it had lots of different styles of cards in the card catalog, and now we just used index cards. Take a hole punch a hole in the bottom, fill out the card, stick it in. And because she had looked for the author card, I thought she might come back later and look for the subject card or the title card, and so I had to make those 2 cards up. And this book happened to be called Flounder and Pete, which was a book about a kid named Flounder and a flounder named Pete. So I made up the subject card, and I made up the title card, and I went and I got the drawer, the F drawer, out of the card catalog, and there, to keep the cards from falling out, there's that little rod, and you unscrew it. And the drawers are like this long, and you unscrew that rod, and you can just pull it out far enough to put the card that you're putting in, and then push the rod back in. But I was kind of in a panic that my English teacher was on her way to the library, so I just pulled that stick out of there like I was a mad mechanic and I was going to beat somebody with a dipstick, right? And when I pulled it out, the cards just exploded into the air, and it was like I was the flower girl at some weird librarian fetish wedding, and card catalog cards. So then I had to spend like the next 2 hours re-alphabetizing those cards, trying to stick that stick back in there. And when I got to the card for the subject, which was fish friends, I just tore the little hole out and stuck it down in there between fish gills and fish environments, or fish environments and fish gills, put it back in. And then I went to English class, and she was up there saying that she suspected that some students were making up titles for their book reports. And I thought, what do you mean, some students? I thought, this is my idea. If other people are doing it, that is intellectual theft, is what that is right there. And so she pulled out this huge thing. She said, I Xeroxed every single one of your book reports. And she picked one up, and she's like, this one, for example, I think might be made up. Fahrenheit 452. A secret. Panic swept the room. She said, I'm going to the library after the assembly with Dr. Dewey Decimal on Friday. Going to go to the library. I will spend all weekend there, and I'm going to see which one of these books don't exist. Panic swept the classroom as we left. Kids were talking about burning the school down, or stealing all the books, or rearranging all the books. And I thought, except for arson, that's not going to help because the cards aren't going to be there. So that night I went home and I found every book report that I had done, and I made a 3 fake card catalog cards for each one of those books: subject, title, author. And then, they couldn't just be all fresh, so I had to dig up the corners of them and lick them and smudge them. And I put some in the oven to brown them. And my mother was like, what's in the oven? And I'm like, oh, I'm browning some card catalog cards. And I'm the last of 5 children. She was like, okay, dear, put some lemon juice on it. And so then Thursday, I went to school, and I went through the normal business of school. And Thursday night, when I was supposed to be asleep, I got on my bike and I rode to the school, and I parked my bicycle behind the dumpster, where there was already another bicycle, which I clearly recognized as Skeeter's, and I thought, he's doing the same thing I'm doing. And I went to the library, and sure enough, he was in there with a flashlight. And I said, you're putting in fake card catalog cards too? You see, this was the only way. If you just hid the books or stole the books, then when she went to look for them, she couldn't find them. But if she went to look through the card catalog, the cards wouldn't exist either, so she would know that something was really up. So we were just going to put in fake cards for all of the books that we had made up. And I was about to climb in the window when somebody poked me in the back, and I jumped and screamed like you do when you're doing something you shouldn't do. Not that any of you have. Somebody pokes you in the back, and I turned around, and it was Fern. And she said, you guys are putting fake cards in the card catalog, aren't you? And I said proudly, yeah, we are. And she said, I bet you just made up cards for the books that you made up. And I was like, yeah, I did. And she said, well, did you think about the fact that it's going to be suspicious if just the books you made up are missing but have cards? And I was like, no, I didn't. And she held up a little Ziploc bag, and she was like, I made up cards for books that you guys didn't invent. Because we're like, you didn't cheat. She said, of course I didn't cheat. I'm smart. But she said, I did this for you guys. And I was like, that is the sweetest thing I mean, if that doesn't touch your heart, what does, right? So we went in the library, and she started going through Skeeter's cards, and she was like, oh my gosh, I see how you got caught, you know. She was like, Fahrenheit 452, 1985, Revenge of the Mockingbird, The Crepes of Wrath, Moby. Oh, I'm not finishing that. And so, we spent the night putting spurious cards in the card catalog. Went home, got home really just in time to get up and go to school the next morning. Sat through the first part of school, and then it was time to go to the assembly with Dr. Dewey Decimal. And Dr. Hoonfoos had gone all out in the gymnasium. You know, there was bunting and American flags and posters about how much we loved Dr. Dewey Decimal, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and Dr. Dewey Decimal never showed up. And Dr. Hoonfoos was so disappointed. He was like, you would think a guy named Decimal would be more punctual and precise. And we went to class, and we went home, and Mrs. Long, the English teacher, went to the library, and Alicia Snitch, who had the most unfortunate last name in history, volunteered to go with her, and they spent the entire weekend in the library going through the card catalog, going through those book reports, going through the shelves. And Mrs. Long figured out who'd been cheating, but she was also the kind of teacher who would rather deal with that sort of disciplinary issue herself and not let the despot handle it, because, you know, he would have just hung us or something. But Alicia Snitch couldn't stand it, so she went to Dr. Hoonfoos and told him, she hadn't figured out the whole plan, so she just told him that someone had stolen a whole bunch of books from the library. And Fern had anticipated this move, and the three of us were standing in the office as this was happening, and Fern handed Dr. Hoonfoos a sheet of paper and said, you need to make this announcement. And he went, and he picked up the microphone, and he said, this is Dr. Hoonfoos, principal of Half Dollar High School. Something terrible has happened. It looks like we were conned by Dr. Dewey Decimal. He had us all go to the gym for an assembly on Friday afternoon, and while we were in there, he stole several hundred volumes of books from our library. I've called Sheriff Hasbro. And he put the microphone down, and he turned, and there was Sheriff Hasbro. Now, Sheriff Hasbro was a big man. He was about 6'8", 6'9", weighed about 480 pounds. And Dr. Hoonfoos turned, and there was Sheriff Hasbro. And Sheriff Hasbro said, you called me? And Dr. Hoonfoos said, I did. And Sheriff Hasbro said, well, you just said you did. So Sheriff Hasbro had heard the announcement, and he said, so you're trying to tell me that while you were in the library, somebody snuck in and stole a bunch of books? And Dr. Hoonfoos said, not somebody, Dr. Dewey Decimal. And Sheriff Hasbro said, do you mean Melville Decimal, inventor of the Dewey Decimal System? And he said, I don't know anything about a Melville Decimal. I'm talking about Dr. Dewey Decimal. And Sheriff Hasbro was like, that's good, because Dr. Melville Decimal died in our time. Dr. Melville Dewey died in like 1931. And then Sheriff Hasbro said, why would somebody come to Half Dollar High School in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia, to steal books? And Dr. Hoonfoos said, maybe they were rare books. And I said to Skeeter, oh, they were rare, all right. And Sheriff Hasbro heard that. And he turned and he looked at us, and then he looked back at Dr. Hoonfoos. And you know how sometimes you look at one person, but you're talking to somebody else? He said, it sounds to me like somebody went to an awful lot of work to get out of a little bit of work. And he turned to us and he lit a cigarette, because it was the 80s and you could. And he walked toward us and he kind of looked us up and down, and he turned back to Dr. Hoonfoos and he said, I'll look into it. And he did. And me and Skeeter got a C in English. Fern got an A. But we almost got punched by Mrs. Long when we asked her if there was anything we could do for extra credit. We were in the cafeteria, not too long after this. We'd stopped with the announcements. We were in the cafeteria, and Dr. Hoonfoos was standing there. And the loudspeaker came on, and we heard, this is Dr. Hoonfoos, principal of Half Dollar High School. And Dr. Hoonfoos kind of went like this. And he looked at the loudspeaker. And he looked at it because he was the kind of guy that believed everything Hercules said. And he couldn't figure out how he was in the office making an announcement if he was in the cafeteria. He said, "This is Dr. Hoonfoos, principal of Half Dollar High School. I'm sorry to tell you that I've had a terrible accident. I'm on my way to the hospital right now." And he's kind of slumped into a chair. I turned to Fern and I said, "You're a genius." I said, "You recorded every announcement he ever made, didn't you? And you just spliced this whole thing together." And she just kind of chuckled. And she went over to Dr. Hoonfoos. She said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, I understand that they're taking you to the hospital. Maybe you should go see how you are." And he said, "I think I will."